Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. What unexplained memory do you have from your childhood? Serious. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
I have a story that was a mystery until a few years ago. When I was 5, I had a big bay window that faced into our backyard. One night I was sitting in bed with the curtains open reading when I suddenly heard a loud thump on the window. I look up, and there's an effing zombie pressed up against my window, staring at me with filmy eyes. I immediately lock up, not knowing what to do. I was the kid who never had nightmares, wasn't afraid of the dark. I knew monsters weren't real, but there one was slowly sliding down the window. Screaming, I ran out of the room, practically gibbering in fear to my grandparents. Once they finally calmed me down and got me to talk, they took me outside and showed me nothing was there. That might have been the end of it, but when I woke up in the morning, there was a greasy smear on the window and what looked like little pieces of flesh under the window. However, when I pointed this out to my grandparents, they said maybe a bird hit it or something. That was the end of it. For years and years after this, I was terrified of the dark. Had to give night lights everywhere and even wet the bed a couple times because the hallway was too dark to get to the restroom. I also started having really bad nightmares because of it. So this was an unexplained mystery to me for almost 20 years. When a couple Thanksgivings ago, my family was talking about weird things that happened to us. I told my story, and my uncle starts absolutely howling with laughter. Once he could breathe again, he told me what had really happened. At the time, my uncle was living in the house next door to us. He had a friend who worked in special effects for movies and had asked my uncle to let him refine the makeup look she was working on for a floating corpse. It turns out, he was coming home from that, still had the makeup on because he wanted his wife to see it, and noticed me in bed when he cut through our backyard as a shortcut. Thinking it'd be hilarious, he slammed against the window to scare me, then went home and promptly forgot about it for years, leaving me traumatized and mentally scarred. When I was around 3 or 4, I remember suddenly waking up at the bottom of my parents' pool, which was 9 feet at the deep end. When I woke up, I just remember looking up and seeing the sun coming through the water. Then suddenly it went dark and I was being pulled up to the top. It was my mom saving me. I don't remember how I ended up at the bottom of the pool, but I was and apparently almost died. I remember flying backward as a very young kid and hitting the wall. I remember it actually didn't hurt, but also remember slumping down and saying to myself not to raise my head up. Decades later, my older cousin told me my dad got mad at me during a family gathering and threw me against the wall. My grandfather told my dad he'd kill him if he ever struck me again. Back when I was about 6 or 7, I lived in a different house than I do now. My mom tucked me into bed like a normal night, but when I woke up, I was in a very tight space. It was pitch black. I couldn't see and felt very cramped. I started screaming for help. After about what seemed like 5 minutes of screaming and some crying, something jerked whatever I was in, and I heard a zipping noise. I then saw my dad's face looking down on me. I was inside of a freaking suitcase. It turns out I was in a suitcase under the guest room's bed, where no one was sleeping. No one in my family knows how the heck I ended up there, or why it happened. It's not just a weird dream or something, because a family member still brings it up sometimes. Completely weird. Still don't know how it happened. TL, DR, woke up in a suitcase. Once upon a time, I was at a family friend's house and went to their toilet. For some reason, I decided to open the lid of the box part of the toilet, what's it called? And for some reason, there was a large live crayfish in there just chilling. The tank? When I was a kid, I was a really bad sleeper. I would always call my mom because I would get scared, and every time she would come in, I would ask for a glass of water. I was about 4 or 5. Even though I was being so annoying, my mom never did more than a big sigh. During the day, she would tell me that I needed to work on trying to get back to sleep instead of calling her, but that was it. Well, one time I woke up scared like normal, called my mom in, asked her for a glass of water, and was waiting for her to come back. She walked back in looking pissed and without a glass of water. She fussed at me to go back to bed and told me to stop being such a little baby. She continued to fuss at me for about a minute before abruptly storming out. Not even a minute later, not long enough to get from the kitchen to my room, let alone change clothes in her room, my mom came into my room wearing a different colored nightgown with a glass of water. She lay down next to me and told me everything was okay and to go to sleep. I asked her about earlier and why she changed her nightgown, and she told me that she hadn't been back since I asked for water. I remember being a little scared of her the next day. I still don't know what that was. At a roller skating rink when I was about 12, I was just rolling towards the rink after getting food, and suddenly I felt a prick on my right arm. I looked back and saw a woman holding a long needle-like object, so I stopped and asked what the hell, and the lady said, "Body fat test," and then hightailed it out of there. The employees were all 17-year-old stoners, so by the time I got anyone's attention, the woman was gone. I've been in the military and therefore tested for tons of illnesses and diseases, which confirmed that I wasn't given random AIDS or something, but to this day, I still have no effing clue what happened.
It's a strange one because I remember in like the early 90s being like in high school and hearing stories about the Limelight. It's a club in New York City that people were walking around with hypodermic needles that were tainted with AIDS or HIV infested blood, and they'd put a card in your pocket that said, "Welcome to the world of AIDS." And this was the 90s, so there was fear out there for sure, but pretty wild.
I kept seeing this boy everywhere we went when I was little, like 4. He was wearing jeans and a tan coat and always seemed to be alone. I kept saying, "Mom, look at the boy." And she would never see him. She tried really hard to see, and we would walk over to where I saw him, but when we got there, he was never there. I remember in a mall, he was on the second level and always looking down at me. At the time, my mom downplayed it, but she was creeped out. I haven't told anyone this, but here goes. I was around 8 at the time and went to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night to go poop. I fell asleep on the toilet, and when I woke up, the entire bathroom was covered in this red liquid. It wasn't blood. The consistency was more like cocktail sauce. I was scared that I somehow did it, so I spent like an hour cleaning it off of everything until the bathroom looked normal again. I went back to bed and forgot about it. I thought it was a dream, but then a few days later my mom was holding up a pair of my shorts, the ones I was wearing that night, and had been covered in that liquid, and I couldn't explain why. I have this very vague memory of going with my mom to pick up my older brother from a play date, and while the parents were chatting, I played with a friend's little sister in their backyard. I was very young, preschool age, I guess. Years pass, and the memory gets so vague, I begin to think it must have just been a dream. One day, maybe around 2nd grade, I'm on the bus to camp, and the girl is on the bus. We both look at each other, and at the same time, we both said something like, "You're the girl from the dream." Her name was Whaley. I never saw her again after that day at camp, despite the bus taking the same route to pick up the same kids every day. Now so much time has passed that I begin to question if the second encounter was just a dream too. So Whaley, if you're reading this, I remember you. I had a memory years ago of being in an Arabic-feeling country, in someone's house, and my mother was trying on a sarai, but I remember it was a great deal of fear. Decades later, not long before he died, I asked my father about it, and he delivered. We traveled to Tunisia. This had to be around 1968, and we'd ended up with an invitation to dinner at some rich person's house. My mother was very outgoing, and used to end up talking to all sorts of people. My father too, come to think of it. The scene took place much as I had described it, but what neither of my father or I knew about the host was running his foot up and down my mother's leg under the table all throughout dinner. My mother, who often described herself as stupid, but was in fact nothing of the sort, growing up in the 40s in Australia wasn't a good time for women, did not react. My father had a temper. It would have gone very badly. As my father said when he told me this was Tunisia in the 60s. If a few tourists had vanished or been found dead in an alley, there would have been no consequences. She totally pulled it off. Mom was kick-ass. They've both been gone for 20 years and I still miss them almost every day. I have to have a bottle of water or some drink with me anytime in the car, so as I sit down and I start to feel parched and my lips chap, this goes back to a memory of me being 6 or 7 and on vacation with my parents. My dad wanted to drive to a petrified forest park in Arizona and we got lost, driving around in the desert with nothing to drink. Both my parents have told me, A, we never went on vacation to Arizona, B, if we did, we certainly wouldn't have gotten that lost. I'm 41 now, but the memory is so strong I'm pretty much convinced it's just their way of trying to cover up almost killing their son. This is a not me but my boyfriend story, and I'm late to the party. I've never seen my boyfriend get so emotional over any other part of his past. When he was about 4 or 5, he woke up in a room, his room, but he had no idea who he was or where he was at. He sat there confused for a little bit, trying his hardest to reorganize something, anything. Still no luck, just a clean slate. He walked out of his bedroom to find a hallway, down to the hallway to see his mom. He asked her if she was his mom. She said yes, laughed it off like he was just playing silly. He saw through the window that a man, who he assumed to be his dad, was standing out by the mailbox. He ran out there and asked the man if he was his dad. "Of course I am, son." Next, my boyfriend asked, "What's my name?" His dad told him his name, but he still couldn't remember anything. As far as he's concerned, that was the first day of his life. He spent the rest of the day sad and scared, got over it, and used to things eventually, but he still remembers that day very vividly and is haunted by what happened. He's afraid that something really bad happened just before, and he repressed the memories. I remember being like 4 or so and being sent to bed before my 3 siblings. I shared a room with my 2 sisters. My eldest sister's bed had a dust ruffle and one of her clogs. It was the 70s. I was sticking out about halfway from under it. I looked at it for some reason, and as I did, I saw it get pulled slowly under her bed. I freaked. My mom didn't believe me, but I'll never forget it. My parents are constantly rewriting our family history. They just pretend things never happened. So I'll bring up some childhood memory, and they try to convince me it never happened. I'm fully grown, and now I never talk about my childhood because of dealing with that. So the majority of my childhood was all BS. My father died when I was 3 years old. I vividly remember walking to the bed where he lay after he died, seeing his purple face with a dribble of the chicken soup my mother was trying to get him to eat still running down the left side of his face. I remember not crying, just being very confused. Then I walked out of the room and went to my bedroom and watched Power Rangers. To this day, my mother, who does not lie to me, adamantly maintains that she had a neighbor take me to their house as soon as my father began to pass away, and that I never saw him like that. She says that by the time I got back to the house, the room had been shut and locked for quite a while. The rest of my siblings attest to this, but my memory persists. Nobody ever told me what the man looked like when he died, let alone that he was aspirating chicken soup when it happened. I have no idea where the memory comes from, but that's the point of this thread, so there you go. When I was between 7 and 10 years old, I used to get frequent nightmares and would go into my parents' bedroom to ask if I could sleep with them for the rest of the night. I would go over to my mom's side since my dad woke up early and I didn't want to cut into what little sleep he already had. I remember looking at the clock and it being a little after midnight. I stood there and gently nudged my mom and whispered at her off and on for what seemed like 30 minutes. Shortly after, I looked at the clock again and it read 3:12. I was so confused that all my fear from the dream went away, and I walked right back into the room and went to sleep. I have a vivid memory of laying on my living room floor. I must have been about 10 and stressing about how I was a lesbian and how I would tell my parents and that I'd never have children. I remember thinking to myself, I'll have to deal with this later. Got up and carried on with my life. Only just remember this a year or so ago. Not a lesbian. When I was a preteen, about 12, my dad came into my room with the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, wanting to look through it with me. He sat down on my bed and asked me my opinion on a few of the ladies. When I didn't seem into it, naturally because this was effing weird, he left it on my bed and said I could take a look at it when I wanted. I left it on my bed untouched out of fear that this was some sort of trap or test, until my mother found it a few hours later. She asked me where I'd gotten it, and I shrugged. I don't know, Dad left it there. Why did he do that? I don't know, I very truthfully answered. So she grabs the magazine and storms off to find my dad. I'm then treated to overhearing an hour-long fight between the two of them. All I specifically remember is my mom asking him why he thought I should have a Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. I don't want him to get weird ideas about stuff, was his response. Years later, it dawned on me that my dad thought I was gay, and this was his way of testing that theory. These days, my dad is perfectly accepting of gay people, but while I'm confident he would have loved me anyway, at the time I think he was just a little uncomfortable with his son being gay. Joke's on them, though. I'm straight, and snuck into their room to find that magazine all the damn time. TL, DR. Dad tries to figure out if I'm gay in the most awkward manner he could come up with. In 7th grade, we did a research project on the US president of our choosing. I showed up on the day we were supposed to present to the class with my John Tyler research project. The teacher was picking us in a random order to present, and most of the class had done theirs already, so I was getting anxious knowing my turn was coming up. So the last person was wrapping up, and I knew I was next. But the teacher stood up and said, "Good job, everyone. Now that wasn't so hard, was it?" I don't remember exactly what he said. This was years ago. I stood up and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Wilson, you forgot me." He said, "No, I didn't. You talked about John Tyler." And I looked around the room for someone to back me up, but they just told me that I'd already presented and needed to sit down so we could leave. I couldn't believe what was going on, so I sat down, and to this day, that memory befuddles the shit out of me. I remember having skin be ripped from my arm to mutated. I had a disease like encephalitis, but one of the doctors at UCSF Stanford and Emory had not seen before that torched my immune system and motor functions when I was very young. To this day, I'm 27 now, I have no idea what I had, what happened with that mutated part of me, or why I made a full recovery. My parents don't know either. Predators have suggested I call those hospitals and find my records. I will try and do that, but that's from over 25 years ago now. When I was a little girl, probably about 6, I had hurt my cheek and was icing it with one of those frozen gel ice packs. For some reason, I was chewing on it, and the plastic broke and a bit of the liquid got in my mouth. I was looking at the package after, and there was a big "do not eat" warning, and I suddenly was convinced I was going to die. Instead of freaking out and crying or telling my parents, I calmly went upstairs and cleaned my room, combed my hair, and got into my best pajamas. After I went to tell my mom, dad, and sister that I loved them and gave them a hug. I then went into my room to lie down on the bed, crossed my arms across my chest like you see in the movies, and was ready to die. When I woke up in the morning, I was really relieved to be alive. No idea what the heck I was thinking, and why I didn't just tell my parents what happened. Still kind of amazes me to remember that calm, accepting feeling I had about dying. I was maybe 3 or 4. We were at my mom's coworker's house for some get-together. Coworker's daughter and I were pretty good friends. We decided to play hide and seek from our parents without them knowing. We got into one of the unlocked cars in the driveway. Eventually, we get bored and start exploring the car. Friend finds nail polish, white out, and we start painting our nails. About 10 minutes later, our mom finds us, and they have tears running down their face. They wouldn't tell us why. Later, when I was older, my mom told me the reason why they were so upset was that one of the compartments in the car that we hadn't gone through was the compartment that had a loaded gun in it. The owner of the car ended up being a good family friend, like a grandfather to me. He never cleaned up the whiteout mess on his dash until he sold the car. He kept it as a reminder to always lock up the gun in his car. Not sure why this story sticks out in my memory. I just vividly remember the absolute terror my mom had on her face.